The galaxy was a vast, unforgiving place, where battles were fought in the cold reaches of space. Captain Kyle had seen it all: the endless wars, the struggle for survival, and the horrors that came with each new battle. His mission, a special. Operation Far Behind Enemy Lines was one of the most dangerous yet. The Valmorans, a race of ruthless aliens, had been humanity's greatest threat for years. They were known for their speed, their strength, and their relentless pursuit of dominance. Kale's team had just infiltrated a Valmoran colony on the distant planet of Trulon. It was a desolate world, filled with endless wastelands and jagged mountain ranges. The mission was simple: gather intelligence on the Valmoran military's plans and then retreat. But like most plans, it had gone wrong from the start. As Kale and his squad advanced through the rugged terrain, they were ambushed by a swarm of Valmoran soldiers. The firefight was intense, the sound of gunfire echoing across the valley. Kale's team fought bravely, pushing forward with every ounce of strength they had. But despite their skill, the Valmorans had them cornered. It was then that Kale heard the faint sound of something, or rather, someone, calling out in distress. Through the chaos of the battle, he noticed a figure lying on the ground just outside the range of fire. The figure was humanoid, with striking blue skin and long silver hair, the unmistakable sign of a Valmoran princess. At first, Kale thought it was a trap. The Valmorans had done this before, using high-ranking officers as bait to draw their enemies in. But something inside him told him this was different. The woman, this princess, wasn't moving, and her blood stained the ground beneath her. She was in grave danger. "Hold the line!" Kale shouted to his squad, ordering them to maintain their position. His mind raced as he made a split-second decision. Ignoring the risks, he dashed towards the injured woman, dodging blasts from the Valmoran soldiers. His heart pounded as he reached her side. She was unconscious, her breathing shallow, and her pulse weak. Her injuries were severe. She had been shot multiple times, and her body was covered in deep, jagged wounds. Kale knew she didn't have much time. The Valmorans would likely regroup and send more soldiers if they saw him helping her. But despite the danger, Kale couldn't leave her to die. He quickly checked the area, making sure there were no Valmoran soldiers nearby, and then he looked back at the princess. He had only one choice. With trembling hands, he reached into his suit and pulled out a small medical injector. It wasn't much, but it could stabilize her long enough for him to get her to safety. But as he pressed it to her skin, he felt an odd sensation, like a pull deep inside him. It was a strange connection, unlike anything he had ever experienced before. Kale's breath caught in his throat as he looked down at the princess. Her skin, once pale from the blood loss, seemed to gain a hint of color. He didn't know how, but somehow the injection had worked faster than expected. But there was something more, something he didn't understand. He had always been taught to never trust an enemy, no matter the circumstances. Yet, here he was, helping someone who was part of the very race that had terrorized his people for years. The thought bothered him, but he pushed it aside. There was no time to think about that now. A noise in the distance caught his attention. More Valmoran soldiers were approaching, their heavy boots echoing off the stone walls. Kyle had no choice but to act quickly. He lifted the princess into his arms, cradling her carefully as he turned to head back towards his squad. But as he moved, something incredible happened. The princess's eyes fluttered open, and for a moment their gazes met. Her eyes were a vivid shade of violet, and they were filled with pain and confusion. But there was also something else, something Kale couldn't quite place. "Why?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Why would you help me?" Kale froze for a moment, unsure how to answer. He had no good reason for it, at least none he could explain. His instincts had kicked in, and he had acted on them without thinking. "I couldn't let you die. Kyle finally said, his voice firm, though he was unsure of what to make of the situation. He knew he was in enemy territory, but he also knew that no matter who the princess was or where she came from, she was a living being in need of help. The princess seemed to struggle with the idea for a moment, her eyes flickering with disbelief. "You are human. You are my enemy." Kale nodded. "I am. But not everyone has to be an enemy. Not yet." The sound of footsteps grew louder, and Kale knew they had no time left. He turned and ran, the princess still cradled in his arms. His squad was waiting ahead, and he knew they would be able to help. But something about the way the princess looked at him stayed with him, and it troubled him deeply. He had made an enemy an ally, for the moment at least. But what would this choice cost him? Kale's heart raced as he carried Princess Leora through the rugged wilderness of Trulon. The sound of Valmoran's soldiers chasing them echoed in the distance, but he had to focus. He had made a decision to save her, and now he had to make sure she stayed alive long enough for them to escape. His team had taken cover near the base of a rocky cliff, waiting for his signal. They were well trained, capable of holding off the Valmorans for a while, but Kale knew it wouldn't last long. The Valmorans would be relentless, and if they didn't get to a safe place soon, they would both be trapped. As Kale approached his squad, his team's medic, Sergeant Valen, rushed forward to assist. "Captain, what happened?" Valen asked, his eyes wide as he saw the princess in Kale's arms. "She's badly wounded," Kale replied, lowering her gently onto a patch of grass. "We need to stabilize her immediately." Valen quickly got to work, using medical equipment to clean and bandage her wounds. Kale stood nearby, watching the medic work with precision. He had seen many injuries in his time, but this was different. The princess's body seemed to be responding strangely to the treatment. Her wounds were healing faster than they should have been, and her breathing, which had been shallow, was becoming steadier. "Something's not right," Kale muttered to himself, his eyes narrowing as he watched. Valen glanced up at Kale, sensing the worry in his voice. "What do you mean?" Kyle shook his head. "It's like her body is regenerating, but I didn't give her anything special, just basic first aid. And yet she's healing faster than anyone I've ever seen." Sergeant Valen frowned. "That's not normal, but we need to focus. We'll figure it out once she's stable." Kale nodded, but deep down he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than just a simple wound. He had felt something when he first touched her, a strange pull deep inside of him. It wasn't just a physical connection, it felt like something more, something beyond anything he had experienced before. As the team worked to stabilize the princess, Kale kept a lookout for any signs of the approaching enemy. He couldn't afford to let his guard down. But every time he looked at the princess, something in him stirred. Her skin, once pale from blood loss, was starting to glow with a soft, otherworldly light. Her long silver hair shimmered in the moonlight, and her violet eyes, though clouded with confusion, seemed to hold an unreadable depth. Suddenly, Leora stirred, her eyelids fluttering as she regained consciousness. Her eyes locked onto Kyle's, and for a moment, they just stared at each other. There was something in her gaze that made Kale feel uneasy, but also strangely connected. "Why are you helping me?" she whispered, her voice weak but steady. Kale's jaw tightened. "I couldn't leave you to die. You may be my enemy, but I won't stand by and watch anyone suffer." Leora's expression was unreadable. She looked down at her own hands, noticing the healing marks on her skin. "What have you done to me?" she asked, her voice a mixture of awe and fear. Kyle frowned. "I didn't do anything, but your body, it's responding to something. Something unusual." Leora's eyes widened slightly. "I feel different. I feel stronger. I can't explain it." Kyle took a deep breath, his mind racing. I think it's because of the blood you've taken from me. My blood, it's somehow mixed with yours. Leora's expression shifted, confusion turning to something darker. Your blood? Why did you give it to me? Kale shrugged. I didn't think. You were dying. I acted out of instinct. Leora's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing more. She sat up slowly, feeling the strength return to her limbs. It was unlike anything she had ever felt before. She was no longer the helpless, wounded princess of the Valmoran Empire. She was something else. Stronger, faster, more aware of her surroundings. As she tested her newfound strength, Kale watched in silence, his mind still trying to process the strange turn of events. He had never imagined that giving his blood to an enemy could lead to something like this. But now, as Leora began to stand on her own, Kale realized that they were connected in a way that neither of them could fully understand. Leora turned to face Kale, her gaze intense. You've given me power, human, but this is not a gift. It's a curse, and I'm afraid of what it might do to both of us. Kale met her gaze, his jaw set in determination. I don't know what this is, but I do know that we need to work together if we want to survive. The Valmorans won't stop hunting us. Leora's eyes softened for a moment, but only for a moment. I never wanted this, but I'll survive, no matter the cost. And if that means working with you, then so be it. The tension between them was palpable. They were enemies, one a human soldier, the other an alien princess. But now, something had changed. Their fates were intertwined in a way neither of them could deny. As the night wore on, the team continued to prepare for their next move. Kyle couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. He had crossed a line, and there was no going back. But he couldn't help but feel that whatever was happening between him and Leora wasn't just the result of a blood transfusion. There was something deeper, something that neither of them fully understood yet. Kale's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of distant footsteps. The Valmorans were closing in, and they were getting closer by the minute. Get ready, Kale said. To his squad, his voice steady but urgent. We're not out of danger yet, and whatever happens, we stick together. Leora stood beside him, her stance strong and confident. Despite the fear that still gripped her, she had never felt more alive. But as the Valmorans drew near, she knew that the bond between her and Kale would change everything. There was no turning back now. The night was still, the air thick with the scent of dust and earth. Kyle and his team had taken cover in a narrow canyon, where jagged rocks towered over them like silent sentinels. The Valmoran soldiers were closing in, their footsteps echoing, off the stone walls. It would only be a matter of time before they found them. Kale's mind raced as he sat next to Leora, his back pressed against the cold rock. She had insisted on joining him, even though her injuries were far from healed. The strange bond between them pulsed with a life of its own, a connection that Kale didn't fully understand. But one thing was clear. This bond was changing both of them in ways neither could predict. Leora sat quietly beside him, her violet eyes staring into the distance. Her once pale skin now shimmered with a soft glow, and her silver hair seemed to move as if it had a life of its own. Kale couldn't help but notice how different she had become in such a short time. It was as though the blood transfusion had unlocked something deep within her, a power she could neither control nor fully comprehend. How are you feeling? Kyle asked, his voice low but filled with concern. Leora turned her gaze toward him, her expression unreadable. Stronger, but also different, she replied. It's like there's something inside me, something I didn't ask for, something I can't control. Kale nodded slowly. He understood better than she might realize. The blood he had given her was no ordinary blood. It was human, yes, but there was something else, something ancient and powerful. He could feel it. 2. The energy flowing between them, growing stronger with each passing moment. "We have to be careful," Kale said, his tone firm. "Whatever's happening between us, it's not normal. I don't know how long I can keep this up. The bond, it's taking its toll on me." Leora frowned, her brow furrowing as she processed his words. "What do you mean? Are you weakening?" Kale hesitated. He wasn't sure how to explain it, but the truth was undeniable. His body was feeling the strain. The more he stayed connected to her, the more drained he felt. It was as if his life force was being drawn out, slowly but steadily. His mind was sharp, but his body felt sluggish. His muscles ached, and his energy seemed to fade with each passing hour. "I'm not sure how long I can keep going like this," Kale admitted. "Every time I use my strength, I feel it, like something inside me is being pulled away." Leora's eyes softened, but there was still a distant, almost unreachable quality to her gaze. "We're connected, aren't we? The blood, the bond, it's affecting both of us." Kale nodded grimly. "Yes, but I don't know what it means, or how to stop it." Leora clenched her fists, her fingers curling into tight balls of frustration. "This power, it feels like it could tear me apart. It's in my head, in my veins. And yet, it also feels like it's the only thing keeping me alive." Kyle reached out instinctively, placing a hand on her shoulder. It was a gesture of comfort, but also of solidarity. They were in this together, whether they wanted to be or not. "We need to figure this out, fast, because if we don't, the Valmorans are going to find us, and neither of us will make it out alive." The ground beneath them trembled, and the distant sound of marching feet grew louder. Kale's grip on his weapon tightened as he scanned the area. The Valmorans were getting closer, and they were bringing more troops than Kale had expected. His team wasn't going to be able to hold them off much longer. Leora stood, her movements graceful yet tense. She could feel the power inside her growing stronger with each passing minute. It wasn't just physical strength, it was something deeper. Her senses were sharper, her awareness heightened. She could hear things Kyle couldn't hear, see movements in the shadows that escaped his notice. But with this gift came a cost. The more she tapped into the power within, the more she felt herself slipping away, as if the energy was slowly consuming her. "We don't have time for answers," Leora said, her voice filled with determination. "We need to fight, now." Kyle met her gaze. "I'm not sure we're strong enough to fight them all." Leora's lips curled into a faint smile, one that held a mix of confidence and something else, something more dangerous. "We don't need to fight them all, we just need to survive long enough to escape." Kale hesitated, then nodded. "All right. But we do this together, no matter what happens." The sound of the Valmoran troops grew louder, their voices growing clearer. It was now or never. The two of them had no choice but to stand and face the coming storm. Kyle stood up, his legs unsteady, but his resolve firm. He could feel the power between them pulsing, as if the very bond itself was urging him forward. The energy that flowed through him was foreign and strange, but it was also powerful. He felt as though he could move mountains, but at the same time, he felt an emptiness inside him, a gnawing weakness that he couldn't ignore. Leora moved beside him, her eyes glowing with determination. She seemed more attuned to the battlefield than Kale had ever seen her. It was as though the bond was unlocking her potential, making her a force to be reckoned with. The Valmoran soldiers emerged from the shadows, their weapons drawn, their eyes cold with hostility. They were here to finish the job, capture the human, and eliminate the princess. But what they didn't know was that Kale and Leora were no longer the enemies they thought they were. They were something more. Leora raised her hand, and with a sudden surge of energy, the ground beneath the Valmorans trembled. Kale watched in awe as the rocks cracked and split, sending dust and debris flying in all directions. It was as though Leora had tapped into the very essence of the planet itself, using the power within her to manipulate the environment. The Valmorans faltered for a moment, their confidence shaken. But they quickly recovered, advancing toward the pair with renewed aggression. Kyle's hand tightened around his weapon as he prepared to fight alongside her. Together they would face the enemy. But what neither of them realized was that the power between them was far from fully understood, and the consequences of their bond were only just beginning. The battle raged around Kale and Leora as they stood back to back, fighting off the advancing Valmoran soldiers. Leora's power surged with each passing moment, the bond between her and Kale pulsing like a living thing. She could feel the energy, flowing through her veins, lifting her, making her stronger, faster. But the more she used it, the more she realized how dangerous it was. It wasn't just her body that was changing, it was her mind, her very soul. The Valmorans were relentless. But Kale and Leora fought with a fierceness they had never known. Kale's strength, despite his physical exhaustion, seemed to be endless as he used the power from the bond to his advantage. He was no longer just a human soldier. He had become something else, something more. But with this newfound power came a heavy price. Kale's vision blurred for a moment, and he stumbled slightly, his body feeling as though it were weighed down by invisible chains. His breathing became heavier, his chest tightening. He glanced at Leora, who was effortlessly dispatching Valmoran soldiers with precise movements, her eyes glowing with the same unnatural energy. But as much as he admired her strength, he couldn't ignore the toll the bond was taking on him. The pain in his chest deepened, and he felt his limbs growing heavy. It was as though his life force was being drained from him, slowly and steadily. The more he fought, the weaker he became. Kyle, Leora's voice broke through his foggy thoughts, and he looked up to see her reaching out to him, her expression filled with concern. "You're not well. You need to stop." "I can't stop," Kyle grunted, trying to push through the pain. "We're not done yet. We can't let them win." Leora's brow furrowed in frustration, but she didn't argue. She knew the Valmorans wouldn't give up so easily. They were hunting her, but they were also hunting him now, too. The connection between them had made her a target, and she couldn't afford to let him fall. Just then, the ground beneath them shook as a powerful explosion tore through the air. Kale barely had time to react before he was thrown to the ground, his body crashing against the rocky surface. His head spun, and he fought to stay conscious as the sounds of the battlefield filled his ears. "Kale!" Leora shouted, rushing to his side, but Kale's vision was fading, his strength slipping away. The bond between them was taking everything he had, his body, his life, his very soul. He reached out for her, his fingers brushing against her hand, and in that moment, something strange happened. A burst of energy surged between them, stronger than anything Kyle had felt before. The bond seemed to come alive, feeding off the pain, the fear, the desperation in both of them. Kale gasped, his chest heaving as the energy coursed through him. He could feel Leora's power merging with his, and for a brief, fleeting moment, he understood. The energy wasn't just from their blood, it was something older, something ancient. Kale's thoughts were clouded with flashes of images he couldn't comprehend. Ancient ruins, long-forgotten wars, and a race of beings far more powerful than either the Valmorans or humans. What is this?" Kyle whispered, his voice hoarse. Leora's eyes widened as she felt the same surge of energy. This isn't just your blood," she murmured, her voice trembling. "There's something inside you, something that's been hidden for centuries." Kale struggled to sit up, his mind racing. "What are you talking about?" Leora took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. I don't fully understand it, but I think your blood, it carries something. Something that my people, no, all of us, have been searching for. Something that could change everything. Kale's heart raced as he processed her words. He had known that their bond was strange, but he hadn't considered the possibility that it was something more. Something that could have far-reaching consequences. You mean to tell me this is more than just a bond? Kyle asked, his voice shaky. This is something I wasn't meant to have? Leora nodded slowly. Yes. I think your blood holds the key to an ancient power, something long lost to our people. It's why they've been hunting us. It's why the Valmorans are so determined to find me, and now it's why they want you, too. Kale felt a cold shiver run down his spine. The Valmorans weren't just after Leora. They were after him, after the power inside him. And they weren't going to stop until they had it. But why me? Kyle asked, his voice trembling with the weight of the revelation. I'm just a soldier. I'm not special. I don't... Leora's hand found his, and she squeezed it tightly. You are more than just a soldier. You've always been more, Kale. The power in your blood, it's something ancient, something that was lost long ago. And it's been waiting for the right person to awaken it. Kyle stared at her, his mind racing. He didn't understand any of this. How could a simple human like him carry such power? How could something so ancient, so powerful, be hidden inside him? Leora's eyes softened. I didn't want to believe it either, but I'm beginning to think that the only reason you and I are connected like this is because of the power in your blood. It's not just about saving me, it's about something much bigger, something that will change the fate of our worlds. Kyle looked at her, feeling the weight of her words settle deep within him. He had always known that his life had been leading to something. But this? This was beyond anything he could have imagined. Leora stood up, her gaze fixed on the horizon where the Valmoran forces were gathering. We need to keep moving. The Valmorans won't stop until they have that power, and we can't let them get it. Kyle nodded, pushing himself to his feet, despite the pain that shot through his body. The bond between them was undeniable now. He could feel it pulling at him, urging him to act. But what did it mean? And how much longer could he hold on before the power inside him consumed him completely? The truth was darker than he had imagined. The Valmorans were hunting them both, not just because of their roles in the war, but because they were the key to something much larger, a power that had been lost to time. And Kyle was starting to realize that he might be the only one who could stop it from falling into the wrong hands. The sun was beginning to rise over the horizon, casting a pale orange glow over the barren landscape. Kyle and Leora stood on the edge of a cliff, looking out at the valley below where the Valmoran army had set up camp. The enemy was closer than ever, and they had no time to waste. Every moment brought them one step closer to being discovered. Kyle felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The bond between him and Leora had only grown stronger, and yet it was taking a toll on both of them. His body felt heavier with each passing hour, and his strength was fading. The power he had once felt coursing through him now seemed like a distant memory, and he could feel the pull of something deep inside, urging him to use more of it. But he couldn't. Leora was standing beside him, her eyes focused on the camp below. She could feel the same pressure, the same drain, but unlike Kale, she wasn't afraid. She had made peace with the fact that she had changed, that the power inside her was part of who she had become, but there was something else she couldn't shake. The closer they got to the Valmoran forces, the more she felt the energy inside, her building, like a storm ready to break. We don't have much time, Kyle said, his voice low but steady. We need to move quickly if we're going to make it to the Valmoran capital before they notice us. Leora nodded, but her eyes remained distant, as if she were lost in thought. Kale could see the worry on her face, and he knew what was going through her mind. She had never asked for this power, but now it was all that stood between them and certain defeat. "What's wrong?" Kyle asked, his voice softening. Leora turned to him, her violet eyes filled with determination but also a hint of sorrow. "I've been thinking," she began slowly, "about the bond, about what it means." Kyle frowned, sensing where this was going. "We've been over this before. We don't have time for second guesses. The Valmorans are too close." "I know," Leora said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But the more I use this power, the more I feel it inside me. It's like it's consuming me. I can't control it. And if I don't find a way to stop it, I don't know what will happen to us." Kale's heart sank as he realized the truth of her words. He had felt the same way. The bond was more than just a connection. It was a force, one that they couldn't fully understand. And as much as they had fought together, as much as they had relied on each other, Kale knew that they were running out of time. If they didn't stop the power from consuming them, it would be too late. Leora took a deep breath and turned to face him. "There's something I haven't told you. Something that could change everything." Kale's eyes widened as he looked at her, waiting for her to continue. "What do you mean?" "The power inside me," Leora said, her voice trembling with uncertainty. "It's not just the bond. It's connected to something much older, something far more dangerous. My people. We were searching for this power, Kale. And I think it's been inside me all along. But it wasn't until we shared that bond that it truly awakened." Kale's mind raced. "So, this power, it's been inside you all this time?" Leora nodded. "Yes, but I didn't know what it was until now. It's the key to everything, the key to ending this war. But it's also the key to something much worse. If I can't control it, it will consume me completely. And when that happens, I don't know what will happen to you too." Kyle's heart pounded in his chest as he realized the gravity of the situation. He had always known they were walking a fine line. But this was different. The power that Leora carried was not just a weapon. It was a force that could destroy them both. "We need to find a way to control it," Kyle said, his voice filled with urgency. "We can't let this power tear us apart." Leora shook her head slowly, her eyes dark with sorrow. "I don't think there's a way to control it, Kale. I think the only way to stop it is for one of us to make a sacrifice." Kale's stomach twisted at the thought. What kind of sacrifice? "The only way to stop the power from consuming? Both of us," Leora said, her voice heavy with sadness, "is for one of us to sever the bond, to let go of the energy before it destroys us." Kale stared at her, his mind struggling to process her words. "You're talking about giving up the power?" Leora nodded, her gaze unwavering. "I don't want to lose this power, but I don't want to lose you either. And if we don't act soon, we'll both be consumed by it." Kyle's heart raced as he felt the weight of her decision. He couldn't bear the thought of losing her, but he knew she was right. They were, both in danger. And the longer they kept using the power, the more it would destroy them. "Then we'll do it together," Kale said firmly. "We'll find a way to end this without losing everything." Leora's eyes softened as she looked at him, a glimmer of hope shining through the darkness. "You would do that? Even if it means losing the bond?" Kale nodded without hesitation. "I would do anything to save us both." Leora smiled faintly, the first genuine smile he had seen in days. "Then let's make this sacrifice together." They stood there for a moment, both knowing that this would be the hardest choice they had ever made. The power between them was dangerous, and the fate of their worlds rested in their hands. But they couldn't let it destroy them. They had to act now before it was too late. As the sound of Valmoran's soldiers grew louder in the distance, Kyle and Leora turned toward the horizon, ready to face the future together, no matter what the cost. The air was thick with tension, the sound of distant footsteps, and the murmur of voices growing louder by the minute. Kyle and Leora stood at the edge of the makeshift camp, their hands still lightly touching, the bond between them pulsing with a life of its own. The Valmoran army was closing in, and they knew this would be their final battle. There was no turning back now. Kyle's body ached, his muscles screaming with exhaustion. The power that had once surged through him was now fading, leaving him weak and drained. He could feel the energy between him and Leora flickering like a dying flame. The sacrifice they had chosen to make, the decision to sever the bond, was the only way to save them. But they both knew it would come at a cost. Leora stood beside him, her gaze fixed on the horizon where the Valmoran forces were assembling. She could feel the same pull of the power inside her, but it was different now. She had made her choice, and she knew what had to be done. The energy that had once filled her with strength and confidence now seemed like a threat, something she could no longer control. "I don't know if I can do this," Leora whispered, her voice heavy with uncertainty. Kale turned to her, his face set with determination. "We don't have a choice. If we don't stop it now, we'll both be lost. We can't let the power control us any longer." Leora nodded, but the sadness in her eyes was undeniable. The bond between them had brought them closer than either of them had ever imagined. It had made them stronger, more powerful. But now, it was a curse, a force that threatened to destroy them both. As the Valmoran forces advanced, Kale and Leora shared one last look. There was no fear in their eyes, only resolve. They had come too far to back down now. "We do this together," Kyle said, his voice steady. Leora smiled, though it was a sad, bittersweet smile. "Together," she agreed. The two of them stepped forward, their feet moving in perfect sync as they made their way toward the heart of the Valmoran camp. The soldiers who had been guarding the perimeter looked up in surprise, not expecting the pair to strike so boldly. But Kyle and Leora had no time to waste. They had a plan, and it was the only chance they had. The first Valmoran soldiers rushed. Toward them, weapons raised, but Kale and Leora were ready. Together, they moved as one, their movements fluid and synchronized, as if they had trained for this moment their entire lives. The power between them surged as they fought, their combined strength pushing them forward. Kyle could feel it, the energy in his veins, the power of the bond still lingering. But it wasn't the same as it had been before. This time, he felt in control. The connection with Leora was no longer a curse. It was a strength. And as they fought side by side, Kale realized that the true power had always been within them, not the bond itself. Leora's eyes glowed with a fierce light, and she moved like a shadow, striking down enemies with a grace that was almost otherworldly. Kyle followed her lead, his mind sharp and focused. He could hear the crackle of energy around them, feel the air tremble as their combined force swept through the battlefield. The Valmoran soldiers fell one by one, unable to match their strength, but Kale knew this wasn't enough. They needed to sever the bond completely. The power that had once given them strength was now threatening to tear them apart. They had to find the source, the heart of the Valmoran command, and destroy it. As they moved deeper into the camp, the sound of explosions and gunfire filled the air. The Valmorans had called for reinforcements, but Kale and Leora were relentless. They fought through the chaos, their every move calculated and precise. The bond between them was growing stronger, and yet Kale could feel the strain. His body was barely holding together, and every step he took felt heavier than the last. Finally, they reached the heart of the Valmoran camp, a large command tent surrounded by soldiers. Inside, the Valmoran general stood, his face twisted in anger as he saw Kale and Leora approach. "You think you can stop me?" the general sneered, raising his weapon. Kale stepped forward, his eyes locked on the general. "This ends now." Leora moved beside him, her hand on his arm. "We don't need to fight you. We just need to stop the power." The general laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You think you can control that power? It's far beyond anything you understand. You're nothing but pawns." Kale's grip tightened around his weapon. Not anymore. With one final unified push, Kale and Leora struck at the heart of the Valmoran command. The power between them surged. But this time, it wasn't just the bond that gave them strength. It was their will. Together, they focused all their energy on the general, and with a final blinding burst of light, they destroyed him. The battlefield fell silent. Kyle and Leora stood amidst the wreckage, panting from the exertion. The bond between them was still there. But it was different now. The power that had once consumed them was now under their control. They had severed the part of the bond that had threatened to destroy them, and in doing so, they had saved themselves. Kale turned to Leora, his eyes filled with gratitude and awe. "We did it," he said softly. Leora nodded, her gaze still focused on the ruins of the Valmoran camp. "We did, but it's not over yet. The galaxy will remember what we did here today." Kale's heart swelled with pride as he looked at her. They had faced impossible odds, and yet they had overcome them together. The power that had once torn them apart had now brought them closer than ever before. "You're right," Kyle said, his voice steady. "But for the first time in a long time, I believe there's hope." Leora smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. And that's something worth fighting for. As the dust settled and the first rays of sunlight touched the battlefield, Kale and Leora knew that their journey wasn't over. The galaxy was vast, and there would be more battles to fight. But for now, they had won. Together.